Hello, everyone. I'm delighted today to be joined by Erik Brenner. He's the CEO and founder of Hilltop Wealth and Tax Solutions. Erik, welcome to the show. Would love you to share what you do and who you help.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So, my firm is an independent registered investment advisory firm, and we work with folks that are in the medical profession, business owners, pre-retired retirees. We are a fully independent firm that we call ourselves comprehensive and really offering a chief financial officer experience, meaning that we help people from their basic retirement calculations and investments, their insurance, tax, estate, help bring that all together to make sure that they're making the right decisions financially.
Nice, nice. And what are some in our space in healthcare/mental health? What are some of the most common poor financial decisions you see folks making?
I think one of the decisions as, especially if you're, a business owner and, running your clinic, and you're in the day-to-day work is a couple things. One is, a lot of times it's really challenging just to be working on your business instead of in it. And so having someone kind of help through a plan on where do you want to take the business, plus how do you want to exit from the business eventually, where people just don't think about it. And then they get to a stage of life saying, okay, I'm about ready to get out of this, whatever that looks like. And they really don't have a plan in place for that or whether they can actually do it financially. And so we want to help them set up those parameters and then help them with the decisions when that time comes.
So exit planning is a big thing you do.
Yeah, exit planning. Another thing that we do is, making sure people have succession plans. What if you become ill, right? Incapacitated, for sometimes it's just a temporary period of time, who's going to take care of what? What's your backup? And if something happens to you and you pass away, how's your family taken care of? What happens? So having a good succession plan in place really matters as well.
If I'm starting a mental health practice and, let's say my intention is to run it for 10 years, at what point should I start to think about, or how should I think about when to engage an exit planner? When should exit planning be something I actually do? Because day one, it probably doesn't make any sense, right? But there comes a point where it really is a thoughtful use of time. How do you think about advising people on that kind of question?
I would encourage someone, you're right, day one's not the time. You're getting it, if you're starting out, you're getting it ramped up, you want to grow the business, you're certainly focused on that. I think the exit planning really comes with 3 years or less, if it can be that far out. And so when I think 3 years, I don't necessarily think you have somebody identified. But there are things you can do to help prepare the business for sale if you're going to sell it, if you're going to exit that way. So there's things you can do to prepare it. And then it's not just last minute decisions. When people make decisions based on emotion and not facts and data, or they make decisions that are rushed, they're usually, in my experience, not probably the best decision. And so that 3 years out, 2 years out is a good time to think about it. The other thing is if you've got a successful business, so assuming what your question, and we say, okay, now we've grown this business to success and it's time to get out. How's that going to look from a structure standpoint? How are you going to get out? How are you going to get the valuations out of it? How's your tax situation? So, when you strike a deal, there's the gross deal and then there's the net deal. The net deal is how much are you going to put in your pocket? So oftentimes a gross deal sounds really good, but maybe when you look at it overall and you look at it also from a net perspective, it's not as good. So, those are some of the things that I think about and we help people through in their decision making.
Makes perfect sense. Do you identify potential exit, either investors or folks that might acquire companies, or is that out of scope for you?
Yeah, it's really not out of it. That's out of the scope for us. What we will do is if somebody has it identified, so oftentimes it's, somebody that they identify that's skilled in the area, whatever business they own, right? And they are going to market that business if it's not an internal sale. But what we do have the experience, and I have the experience of being a business owner, and I have bought and sold businesses along the way, is helping them be a third party guide. So, you need good legal help, right? You need good tax help, which we have tax professionals on our team as well. But you also need someone that I believe often that can bounce ideas, directionally. Hey, take a look at this. This is the deal. What do you think about it? So I actually like that often versus me or the firm representing the sale. So that would be a little more partial to selling the business, making the commission, right, on the sale, where we can be a third party to our clients on really helping them along the way. Is this the best deal for them?
More commonly, you play rather than sell side representation, you're playing that third party role.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's really where we fit versus trying to find a right fit. We do have some resources we can direct them to maybe people to talk about doing that for them, but we play that other role of, we want to run alongside you and be on your side of the table.
I think that is rare because my experience as a buyer and an investor in businesses is it's pretty unusual that a seller gets competent, impartial advice. So very often a seller will just talk to people they know. They'll call up their accountant, for example, and their accountant very often has an interest in a deal not proceeding because the accountant knows after there's a deal, there's a pretty decent chance they may lose the customer. And so it's pretty rare, I think, that sellers of high quality businesses do get, especially smaller businesses, do get impartial advice.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. And so, we just try to fill some of that need. And like I said, there's a gross amount and a net amount. So, if somebody has done their work and has somebody that they're working with to say, okay, here's the structure of the deal, but also what's it going to mean from a tax perspective? Because we have to remember that most of the sales, especially if it's a successful business, is the major cost is the tax that's going to get paid and how you might go about mitigating that. And many of these sales, to do that, you want to know in advance. So, when you get down to it and you're close to closing, there may be less that we can do. I think that having that someone on your side, like we said, that, we're not passing along or we lose the client or whatever, clients have said it's very helpful.
Yes, yes, I can imagine it is. I think also perhaps part of the secret sauce you're bringing, tell me if I'm right, is you're a business owner and an entrepreneur yourself. So there's a degree of empathy that you're bringing into this equation. Where, and as someone that has bought and sold businesses, it can be an emotional roller coaster, right? You've been in their shoes, it's not an easy thing rationally, it's not an easy thing emotionally.
Yeah, that is correct. And I have worked with and seen a lot of letter of intents and non-disclosure agreements and sale agreements. And again, we don't bring in the legal aspect, but I've seen and done it myself and also seen it when we work with clients. And so, we've seen a lot, and so we can bring that to the table to really help guide our clients along the way.
What are some of the nuances to working with folks in the medical healthcare space that you see?
Well, I think I know the nuance that, and the challenge that they have is, insurance and how they get paid and revenue sources. That's certainly a challenge, and managing people. So, I find, that in a lot of industries, when you think about it, healthcare and other industries, a lot of them grew up in the industries. So, in the healthcare, example is they started out maybe as a therapist or a doctor or, whatever the profession in, didn't really start off leading people. And then they grew this business and all of a sudden they're leading teams. And so I think that's a challenge for a lot of folks versus corporate world. Oftentimes those people that lead those companies, they've been schooled, mentored for many, many, many years and move up among the ranks. And so I think balancing that's a challenge. And then really the other challenge is, as I said earlier, is working on your business versus in it. When I work on my business and think about my business, I try to get away from the business. I try to have time that I'm not thinking about way down deep and working in it, right? Where's the business going? How am I thinking about it strategically? So I think, really trying to manage your time and working on that versus it gets done when it gets done. I think those are some of the challenges. The other thing is, I think, a lot of times folks want to, cut a corner, if you will, or try to get it done. Oh, I can understand this. And, by not getting good, having a good team and a good guidance, it can really cost them time, effort, energy, knowledge, and financial. Over time, it can cost you a lot more than what you were trying to save. So those are some of the things I think that I've seen or have seen, over the years.
So at what point, we talked a little bit about exit planning, retirement planning. I know even before we get to those points of the journey, you guys are there to help with tax as well. Who is the right sort of, and you've talked about the verticals that you work with, but at what point in the journey does it make sense to engage you generally? Like, let's say I need tax planning support. How big should my business be? But what's the point in my journey where it makes sense to work with you?
Yeah, I mean, the tax we kind of see in a journey of small business start out and then they grow. Small business still needs maybe some bookkeeping support, things that the owner tries to do on their own. And oftentimes they do it, but then they get behind on billing. They don't have the right financials, having really solid financials and all of that. So when you talk about a business owner, we often see, that as a piece, if nothing else, get a firm that can do bookkeeping, even if it's basic, right? What's the need? So I think growing into that. And then once you get into, I'll say, 500,000 to a million in revenue, a million in revenue and up, then you can get into more tax planning. You can get into more benefits. Should I offer benefits to my employees? Is it some sort of health insurance, some sort of retirement plan, some sort of flexibility? Some sort of, what's your PTO policy, right? Do you have these policies in place? We found that, it's really, I don't think it's a secret that with employees now, it's not just all about the money and what they make. It's also about the entire package and what you're offering. So we find that to be, do you have an overall package that is going to keep folks with you? And so when someone gets into kind of that revenue, depends a little bit on the business for sure, but they kind of get into those revenue numbers. And then once you're really personally taking out of the business and making a living that is a very what I would call well established, and you see your tax bill continuing to increase. One of the things that we see a lot is when people have incomes that continue to go up, they're paying more tax and they just kind of pay it, because they have the money to pay it. So they're just, I'm making more money and versus being proactive. So, there's a reactive and there's a proactive. And so proactive would be, do you know where your tax bill is going to lie, right? As you get towards the end of the year. I mean, how much are you going to owe? There should not be a guess. It's really hard with businesses, and we do a lot of planning as we end the year with our clients, and those that are businesses, we have to sometimes plug in, last month's numbers before we get to the end of the year. But knowing where do you land? What is your tax nut? You should have at least a projection idea. And it's amazing to me the amount of folks, business owners that don't have any idea, none. And there's a lot of year-end stuff we can do. As you grow, I think that's really important. Sometimes the money's just coming in, things are going well in your business, and you say, man, I'm paying a lot of tax. But if you don't do something about it and influence it, it won't change. I always tell people, Daniel, that Uncle Sam will not call you to tell you you're paying too much. He's not going to pick up the phone and go, hey, I noticed you're really increasing your tax nut. What about this idea and that idea, right? It's up to you as the taxpayer ultimately, or the professionals that you're working with to guide you along the way and make sure you're making the right decisions. And so really, really important. Hopefully that answered your question, as far as the progression of a business owner, clinician, and some of the things they want to think about.
What excites you? I'm curious. You've been doing this for a while. Before we hit record, you told me you've been doing this for more than 30 years. What's exciting for you next? Where are you in your journey? What are you excited to do next?
Yeah, I mean, what's exciting for me is to see success in how they define it. So, our clients, how they define their success, which is, really, really great that it's different. It's so different for everybody. So I like people to feel like there's a level of success, right? However they define it. I like that with our clients. I love, helping people get to really good decisions. Absolutely just want to minimize what I can from a tax perspective, but also just see people's success. And then also success of the team, so that, I like people to see that they're growing and being successful in their careers and just have a real passion around that and helping people. And what we've done just, like a lot of professions that are in a profession that helps people versus building a lawnmower or a snowblower or something. I guess that helps someone to mow the lawn, but really having an influence, that really is what motivates me.
Nice, nice. As we come towards the end of our time together, I always like to end on a human note and ask folks, when you're not working on your business, which is a baby of a sort, what do you do for fun? What do you enjoy outside of the business?
Yeah, so I love to play golf, spend time on the golf course. My wife and I like art and wine. So sometimes, those go together real well and sometimes maybe not so well. So we like going to art shows and doing wine tastings and, having that. And we're now empty nesters, so we're enjoying our time. We have four now grown. And so we're kind of enjoying the next stage of life there as well and just in enjoying the time that we have in the off time that we have.
What kind of wine do you like?
We're typically Cabernet Merlot, California based, right? That's where we're at. Mainly I'll drink just about any type of wine except the real sweet, but we stay in the red area, and that's because my wife is a Cabernet person. The more woody taste, right? The more of that, the more she likes it. But that's been real fun.
Awesome, awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you, Erik, and so important for business owners to get intentional about thinking through some of these things that I know from personal experience are so easy to put off. So thanks for your
Yeah, I appreciate that, Daniel. I'd like to offer your listeners a free book that I wrote. It's called The Personal CFO Revolution. And so I'll just send them to my website at hilltopwealthtax.com/podcast. So it's hilltopwealthtax.com/podcast. They can go to the website, download a free copy. It's a read that it's not a tremendously thick book, but it talks, some of what we talked about here today. I think it'll help people with direction. They can find out a lot more about our firm as well, obviously, on the website.
We will put that in the show notes for folks to click and give them
That's
easier
great.
access. So thank you.
That's great.